Gotcha.
Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about my top tips for fighting Alatreon. If you find any of these useful, let me know. If you have any that I didn't add to the list, be sure to add them in the comment section. Let's get started. The first group of tips are going to be all about fundamentals. Tip number 1, you've probably already heard about it, so I'm going to make it real brief. Escation Judgement. This is Alatreon's Nova. The way it works is, after about 6 to 7 minutes, he runs to the middle of the map and he uses a move that drains your health bar. If you did not deal enough elemental damage to him up to this point, this move will basically wipe your whole team. You have a very low chance of out-healing it because it's specifically been designed so that you basically can't out-heal it. If your team did do enough elemental damage, he will topple before he reaches this point, and then your team will get like lots of damage when he's knocked down, and then when he goes to use Escation Judgement, you survive it pretty easily by simply eating an Aster jerky or two. But why don't we talk about a few advanced tips for dealing with the Escation Judgement now. Tip number 2, something you may not have known about Escation Judgement and the topple is every time you knock down Alatreon by dealing enough elemental damage, it gets harder to do that the next time, right? So he topples, and then the elemental threshold for the next topple is larger. That's why as the fight increases, you may have noticed that your team just barely doesn't seem to do enough in order to stop the Nova, alright? Just think of it as an increasing, damage threshold for him in the later stages. This means even if you're doing well in the beginning, the truth is your team may still not be skilled enough or well built enough to handle him in the late stages. Tip number 3, it's really obvious when Alatreon's going to be using the Escation Judgement. He runs to the center of the map, he starts charging up. What I recommend when he's doing that, get your sharpening done. If you don't need to sharpen, I definitely also recommend just dealing more damage to him as he charges it up, and especially being right underneath him as he lands. He's not dangerous during the Nova, so you can take that moment to do whatever you're going to do, resetting your buffs, getting your sharpen, or dealing a little more damage to him. However, once he's in the air and coming back down, be prepared to eat your Aster jerkies. Don't be shy about eating them. One of the things I've done is I've underestimated how quickly your health bar drains even after the topple, and so I eat my Aster jerky late, and he actually kills me before the Aster jerky animation is done with the munching, right? And then you don't get the effect, and then you die because he actually drains you. So don't be shy, eat your Aster jerkies. You really only need to survive 2 Novas anyways, and you can bring 5 Aster jerky with you, so you really should have more than enough to deal with the Novas if you eat 2 jerkies per Nova. Tip number 4 is kind of a complicated and yet so fundamental and important thing to understand about the mechanics of the game. I'm going to make it really easy because the game doesn't really explain it very well. We're going to talk about how to control what element Alatreon is stuck in, right? So he's got 3 elements, fire, dragon, ice, and he's constantly rotating. It goes like this, fire, dragon, ice, or if you started out as ice at the beginning of the fight, it goes ice, dragon, fire, right? Well, let's say you're using a fire weapon and you want him to stay in ice mode. And he starts out as ice, he's moved over to dragon, you can force him to go back into ice mode if you break his horn. So this only causes him to revert 1 time. Does that make sense? And you get 2 breaks. So 1 break will send him back into ice form. Rather than moving on to fire form, he'll move back into ice form. And then he'll try to go back to fire form again. He'll go to dragon, you get another chance to break the horn, and then he goes back into ice form. Okay, so you get 2 breaks and no more breaks. So you can control him twice, and after that, he's just going to start cycling like he normally would. Now, in between those 2 breaks, that's usually enough time to get him killed anyways. So if he starts out, let's say he starts out as fire and you're using an ice weapon to get the most elemental damage you can on him. He starts moving over to dragon, you need to break a horn, and then what'll happen is he'll jump right back over to fire. Then he's going to move over to dragon, you break the other horn, and he moves right back over to fire. At this point in the fight, both of the horns are gone. So what happens is, next time he moves on to his dragon form, you can't force him to go back to the previous element. He's just going to keep rotating. So now the fight's much more difficult because he's going to be in the wrong element. So you get 2 horn breaks, you really got to take advantage of them, and you especially don't want to accidentally trap him in the wrong element. This is so important, let me explain this in detail. So basically, let's say you go into the fight with an ice weapon, because you want to hurt him while he's in his fire mode. Well, let's say you get down there, you beat him up while he's in fire form, then he turns into the dragon form, and you failed to break one of the horns. Uh-oh. what happens? Well, he's going to turn into the ice form, and now it's you using an ice weapon against Ice Alatreon. That's a big no-no because you're not dealing any elemental damage to him at all. And so next time he goes to the dragon form, here's the huge mistake you can make. You accidentally break one of the horns. See, you don't want to do that. You don't want to break one of the horns when he's in the wrong element. So he went from ice to dragon, and then you broke the horn. Oops, now he's going to go back to ice. So you've essentially nerfed your damage output by keeping him trapped in the ice mode. This was something that took me a little while to understand. I finally understand it. I want to make sure you guys understand it too. So it's possible to trap him in the wrong element. Do you see? So if you want to trap him in ice form, you got to make sure he was in ice form prior to going into dragon form. You want to trap him in fire form, you got to make sure he was in fire form prior to going to the dragon form. And then only in the dragon form can you break the horns. So important to understand that. Tip number 5, in order to make it so that you can use any weapon you want against Alatreon, Capcom has included an elemental damage modifier on Alatreon. So the reason this is really important is because weapons like the hammer and the greatsword really don't deal that much elemental damage. Luckily, in order to keep things balanced, Capcom has nerfed some weapons that are too good at elemental damage, while maybe slightly buffing weapons that are bad at elemental damage. So right here we have a chart that shows this, and it means that you can play the weapon you want. You're just going to have to include an elemental damage build and have the right element like fire or ice, okay? So if you want to play greatsword with elemental damage, here's your chance. You've got a damage modifier on it, whereas some other weapons like the bow actually have an elemental nerf, okay? Tip number 6 is the last fundamental tip that I'm going to be giving in this video, and is all about where you should attack Alatreon for the most damage. Monsters have different hit zone values for different body parts, and when you attack them in the right body part, you get more damage on them. Alatreon's head, if you're using a longsword, which is slice damage, or a hammer, which is blunt damage, you do not even need to soften the head. Softening Alatreon's head does not benefit you at all. So when you're attacking Alatreon, you need to stop softening the head. You're wasting your time and you're putting yourself in a dangerous position. Instead, you should just go ahead and start attacking him on the head to get your damage out. But let's say you're having trouble attacking him on his head because he, most of his powerful moves come from there, and he moves his head really fast. He's got like one of those snake-like heads, right? What's your next best target as a slice or a blunt type weapon? His forearms. His forearms take a lot of elemental damage, but they also just have the best hit zones overall for slice and for blunt. So you've got two targets, the head and the forearms. In a last-ditch scenario, you will go for his hind legs. So you will soften the forelegs, you will soften the hind legs, you will not soften his head. Does that make sense? For shot type damage, the hit zones are kind of different. I suppose with the bow, you'll probably focus on the arms, and if you want to attack the head, you actually do want the head to be softened to max out your damage, but the arms will probably be softened by people playing with impact and slice weapons anyways. So if I was using the bow, I would focus the arms. However, if the wings and the tail are softened, those are decent probably targets as well. But yeah, I'd probably focus the arm. The same could probably be said for the light bowguns as well. If you're attacking Alatreon from the side, try to get the bullet to go through each arm and the chest together. So kind of shoot him at the elbow joint, if that makes sense, right? You want to hit the arm, the chest, the arm, just like that. However, if you're in front of him or behind him, just because of the way elemental ammo works, where it's kind of like a piercing ammo, you'll probably shoot through the tail or through the head and hope that it travels along the whole body, and that'll probably net you the most damage. Don't forget that elemental ammo types actually deal some raw damage, which we refer to as shot type damage. And when it comes to shot type damage, the chest, when it's softened, is the best target, followed closely by the head and the tail. Okay, so those are the best spots for shot type damage. But again, I just said it, didn't I? Shot type damage is raw, and you're trying to deal enough elemental damage to Alatreon to get him to topple. So if you're using the bow, you're not using a raw damage bow build, you're using an ice damage bow build. So you're shooting him in the forearm. If you're using elemental ammo types on the bow guns, you're trying to shoot him through both the arms across his chest. Okay, so, but really, it's so easy with the elemental ammo, in my opinion. You just shoot him wherever you want, and he's probably going to die. Okay, wow, we've covered so many tips that should make this fight so much easier for you guys. You're going to use fire and ice damage types, you're going to pay attention to what he starts as, and you're going to start as the opposite of him. You're going to focus on the head without softening it if you're using slice and blunt weapons, because you don't have to soften it. On the arms and the hind legs, you do have to soften. When he uses the big explosion, he's changing elemental types. When he changes to dragon type, you're all going to focus on the head and cause the horns to break. This will force him back into the mode you were originally fighting him as, which allows you to stay in the correct elemental mode and max out your damage. Every time you topple him is going to get harder to topple him the next time, and all these tips fundamentally help you understand how to stop him from reaching Escation Judgement, which is his Nova, and if you can't topple him before the Nova, he will wipe the team. So it's all about that damage threshold for elemental damage types, understanding how to reach it, and understanding some of his other basic sort of like mechanics so that you can play as efficiently as possible, get the good damage in, and defeat this guy easily. He's really not too tough once you understand all this stuff. I have a lot more tips in this video, but if these tips that you just heard already helped you, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. In the next group of tips, I want to talk about wall splatting Alatreon, and I want to talk about the Alatreon mount. Both of those things are going to give you knockdowns, or I guess you could call them crowd control, and I find that they're really important. So let's talk about them. The moment you begin the special assignment, you're just dropped off into the fight, and you don't really have a chance to pick up slinger pods, so this makes it hard to wall splat Alatreon. That's one of the challenges. The trick is to run over and grab one of the stones. Don't wait for one of your light weapon friends to create a pod, because I would say 7 out of 10 times, they don't. People who use light weapons, they are notoriously bad at actually using a clutch claw attack because they don't want to. They feel like it's a waste of their time. And if they're in multiplayer, they're basically just waiting for you to do it anyways. So you don't always get a pod generated by your friend. Run over, grab a stone, and the moment you do this, you will have what you need to wall splat Alatreon. Now, this actually also has another benefit of drawing Alatreon over to one of the ledges where you can build up mount damage, or even pulling him closer to one of the places in the wall where you can actually wall splat him anyways. Tip number 2, so now you have the stones that you need in order to wall splat Alatreon. What are the rules for wall splatting this guy, or flinch shotting this guy? It's real tricky actually. There's very specific places on the side of the wall that you can throw him into. Basically they're these little triangular formations. They're pretty small, and he really does need to run straight into them and smack them. If you send him into the wall's sort of circular, and what'll happen is he'll kind of push to the right or to the left because that's what's going on with the physics in the game. So if he's pointed pretty close toward the target and you throw him into the wall, he'll hit the wall, but he won't wall splat. He'll start edging his way over toward that sort of formation that will actually cause the wall splat. So it's very important to get these wall splats early on in the fight, because if anyone in your team is running Agitator, they don't receive Agitator until he's enraged, and Agitator is a huge buff. If nobody's running Agitator, it doesn't really matter. The other thing I'll say is that Alatreon eventually, at the beginning of the fight, eventually he starts flying. It's much easier to not wall splat him, but basically flinch shot him out of the air if he's flying. Okay, so if you've saved your Rocksteady Mantle for the beginning of the fight, once he starts flying, throw that baby on. He doesn't use his thunder moves in the air, he only uses them on the ground. So throw that Rocksteady on, grab him by the head as soon as you can, and shoot him out of the air with basically an aerial wall splat. I mean, they're called flinch shots, so it's kind of a strange thing, isn't it? But yeah, it's much more consistent to knock him out of the air, and make sure, whatever you do not waste the wall splat, because it's such a benefit for your team. You know, when he knocks down and everyone can sort of bully up on him, this is what gives you the ability to build up that elemental damage very easily and get the topple. So I would say if topples are such an important part of the fight against Alatreon, we also have to say proper flinch shotting is extremely important. It gives the team a much needed knockdown, and this knockdown is your window for dealing lots of elemental damage. Don't forget, once he's knocked down, if you're using a slice weapon or a blunt weapon, don't worry necessarily about softening the forelegs and going for the forelegs. You could just go straight for the head. Now, of course, if you go for the forelegs, your elemental damage is going to be a bit higher on those, but the head doesn't even have to be softened. So if you're blunt, you're going to go there anyways to build up a KO because you want a KO knockdown. I suppose if the arms are already softened and you're using a slice weapon and you haven't gotten the topple yet, then you could go for the foreleg instead. Tip number 3. So, okay, we've talked about the wall splat, and by the way, don't forget, he can be wall splatted twice in a row, just like any monster. But so we've talked about the wall splat. Let's talk about getting the mount. So the mount with this guy is really difficult. He will drain your stamina instantly with his moves, and he attacks very quickly while you're mounted. The mounting game for this guy's tough. It's actually pretty difficult. He only knows 2 moves during the mounting game. Basically one where he flails while he's flying, and the other one is when he dashes. When he dashes, what happens is you actually have to brace. You know how to brace? On the GameCube, not the GameCube, on the Xbox controller, it is the right trigger. This is what allows you to brace. And so you have to recognize the dash so that you can brace for it so that you don't lose too much stamina. Whereas with the flail, the trick to the flail is you need to immediately jump to a different body part and start stabbing them as fast as you can. You get about 3 stabs in, maybe a little more than 3, maybe 4 if you're lucky. And it's one of those things, it's another get good moment because you're really not going to be good at this until you practice it. And that is something that's very true for Alatreon. He's really a monster. You have to practice. So if you're having trouble, don't give up. Just keep trying. But that knockdown from the mount is so important. Now let's talk about some tips for being sure that you do get it. How about this? Before you've had a mount, before you go for it, drink a dash juice. Because that dash juice helps tremendously during the mount, in my opinion. Another tip, if somebody else mounts and you've got wide range, go ahead and drink another dash juice. This will make sure that he has it. It will also reset his stamina to full. Okay, so both of those things are a really big deal. And it's one of the reasons why I always recommend having one person, if you're playing in a big group, and this is a group of casuals, just casual gameplay, maybe they're randoms, have somebody play the healer. Maybe you should play the healer. Just make sure that the guy, when he mounts, he does get that refill on his stamina because it makes a huge difference in this particular fight. It's really, really easy to lose the mount for Alatreon, except if you're using the insect glaive. Of course, with the insect glaive, all you really need to do is jump back and forth. It's very easy. This will end the mount very quickly, so that the insect glaive has a huge advantage for getting the mount. I have a few last tips about mounting. The first thing I want to mention is that I did run tests against Alatreon, and he really has a pretty large threshold from mount 1 to mount 2. So even if you have a special mounting build, it takes a while and it just doesn't seem worth it because you usually give up some other important skills in order to build for mount damage. So really I would just go for the first mount, especially if you're using any other weapon except for Insect Glaive. Insect Glaive can get the second mount, but it's close, it just takes a lot of your time and it's not really worth it because Insect Glaive mostly will be getting better damage with this other moves. Okay, and Insect Glaive, if you're not attacking him on the forelegs and the head, it's because you're attacking him on the wings, but the wings aren't really that good of a hit zone for slice damage. So really, with the Insect Glaives, get your first mount done when you think is opportune. Maybe if you're not worried about anyone else stealing the mount, save it for the end of the fight. Maybe after his first Nova, maybe after his second Nova, use it later when it's harder to topple him to give your team that extra bit of topple, right? That extra knockdown, and this will give you guys more time to build elemental damage. But yeah, so my point here, if you're using like the Sword and Shield, or maybe you're using the Lance, or with the hammer, I would say don't worry about it because either way you're going to ledge hop. But if you're using some other weapon, don't worry about the second mount. It's really not worth it. It's not worth it. With the hammer, if you guys are nice enough and you've got a hammer player on your team and you're smart enough, bring that guy over to the ledge. The hammer player always benefits from the ledge, especially if he has the airborne skill on his build, which he should if he's using a hammer, because hammers really do make use of ledge hopping. They really do get a lot of damage, and those suckers can get the mount very quickly with the ledge hop as well. So if you have 2 people ledge hopping, longsword can ledge hop too technically, but you never build airborne on a longsword. So I suppose you could though. Maybe I should try that someday. But yeah, so go for 1 mount and don't forget to use the ledge hop by the ledge. Draw him over there. The next group of tips are for surviving Alatreon. Tip number 1, this is going to be my favorite one, and maybe you'll be mad at me for saying this. Tip number 1 is going to be get good. And by that, I mean go memorize his moveset. You got to do this. There's no way to cheese this guy. Okay? You can't chill back with your sticky ammo and just be like, oh, he's easy. Look, we got sticky ammo, and then easily win. See, Capcom took that away from people, and then everyone's screaming, he's overtuned, he's too difficult, right? You actually have to memorize his moveset, Learn how to punish his moveset, because that's how you get your damage in, and this is what gives you the topple for the Nova, right? So you really do have to memorize that. Tip number 1, practice, 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 go get good. Tip number 2 is going to be about efficiently building for defense in your armor setup while still maintaining really high offense. In order to build defense, you always have to give up some of your offense, but there are certain skills you really don't have to have, and there are other skills that give you so much defense. I don't understand why, in the case where you're fighting a fairly tough monster, why you would give those up. In fact, I've gotten a lot of shit on this subject before. As you guys know, I was recommending Divine Blessing Secret to people before Alatreon came out, and back then I was saying, well, what if he comes out and he's actually really tough? Of course, Divine Blessing Secret and a health boost. This is pretty standard. It's going to be showing up on almost all of my Divine Blessing is the #1 skill to do that, in my opinion. Divine Blessing really stands above the rest by cutting damage virtually in half. Divine Blessing Secret, in this case, is better to bring on your build than attack boost and peak course. Divine Blessing 3, huge fan of Divine Blessing, obviously. All these people came out of the woodwork. They're like, oh, you're shit at this game. You're terrible. Why would you give anyone this advice? And here we are today with people recommending that Alatreon gets nerfed. They've probably never even tried builds like this. And yet they're going to come out and say, he's nerfed. I can't use my sticky ammo. I can't use my glass cannon build. You know what I mean? They're all frustrated by it. It's not fair. Well, anyways, let's talk about these armor set builds that I was talking about. Divine Blessing Secret. 2 pieces of armor from the Gold Raytheon armor set will give you Divine Blessing Secret, and the Divine Blessing Secret armor pieces are really efficient, right? So you're going to build health boost, you're going to build Divine Blessing Secret. You can do that really easily with the chest and the waist slot for the Gold Raytheon armor set. This actually leaves 3 pieces of armor slots open for anything else that you want. You could build, you could build something like 2-piece Kulf, and this is going to give you Guts, which is what I currently do, and this gives you a ton of survivability. You know, the Guts has procced before for me, and Divine Blessing Secret procs throughout the whole fight, which is really nice. It keeps my uptime high too. It means if I took a hit, I can just kind of shake it off and keep attacking. Sometimes I just heal back up with my health regen augmentation, so I never stop and heal. I just keep going because the Divine Blessing Secret is absorbing so much of the damage for me. And then you've got some other options too. You can go for the Dragon Vein Awakening with the Safajiva set, so you can just do 3 pieces of that and 2 pieces of the Divine Blessing Secret skill together if you want it. And then there's another option. You can have the Velkhana armor set where you can build Crit Element, and so if you're not able to build like a Kiar weapon from Kulf like I can, see I've got all the Kiar weapons, you can instead build 2-piece Velkhana, and this will give you Crit Element. So you get 2 pieces of Gold Raytheon, 2-piece Velkhana, you'll have Divine Blessing Secret, and you'll have Crit Element, and then in there you'll just go on to build something like Weakness Exploit, Crit Eye, Crit Boost, and that's for your raw damage. And then you've got Crit Element, which really does benefit from all that extra affinity that you built on with the Weakness Exploit and the Crit Eye. And don't forget, in your charm slot, you probably have something like Fire Attack or Ice Attack, depending on what Alatreon started as. So a lot of the builds that I'm going to be putting together for countering Alatreon, whether you're somebody who's really new at the game or whether you're somebody who's way past Master Rank 100, it's probably going to be focusing on having this combination of very high defense and very high offense. I would try to get both of those into the build, and in a lot of the RPG games I've played, that's what it means to be min-maxed. You don't ignore the best defensive skills just to have a marginal increase in your attack damage output when you're sharing these carts. And I'll mention again, when you cart, your damage output drops to 0 anyways. This Alatreon fight is a terrific example of why we do want to learn a little bit about the defensive skills in the game, because it actually does benefit you, but only when the fight's tough enough. And the answer to a tough monster is not to tell Capcom to nerf the monster, but to learn a little more about survivability and defense. So here's an example of a highly defensive, but also great damage Ice Hammer build. Of course, if I wanted to use the Fire Hammer, I would just use the Kiar Hammer Fire, and I just swap between the two basically, right? But take a look at the loadout. So you'll notice I did exactly what I was talking about. We've got Divine Blessing Secret and Guts together. It's nuts how much defense that is. And so if you're a player and you're newer or you're just really struggling, the very first thing you can do is make sure you're not using up your team's lives, because you will usually lose to just running out of lives before you lose to the Escation Judgement problem. This is what I've found to be true. Once people understand the mechanics for Escation Judgement, the next challenge becomes fighting him for 20 minutes and not dying. Divine Blessing Secret and Guts together will keep you alive. Take a look at the other things we have on the build though. we're totally able to have critical element because of the QR hammer. And then we've got airborne, weakness exploit 3, crit boost 3, we've got crit eye 5, and we put the last 2 points in the Rocksteady and in the Temporal Mantle, and then we maxed out ice attack as well. And the truth is we'll get plenty of damage with that. We are missing agitator, which is quite a extra damage to be missing, and that's kind of what you give up to have all this extra defense. So it's a trade-off. You can have a little more damage, or you can have a lot more defense. In this case, I've gone for the lot more defense. We've got the Divine Blessing 5 right there. You can see I've also fit recovery speed and ice resistance on the build. You really didn't have to have the ice resist. You can drop both of those and just take like agitator up to 4. You can even drop the airborne and not use ledge hopping, and then you would have agitator 5. So you can see there's plenty of wiggle room, but I've opted for the recovery speed and the ice resistance just to show you what you could do. Okay, just to show you how flexible the build is. And, you know, maybe you're using a weapon like the Greatsword that requires focus on it. Well, there's room to build focus on it. You see what I'm saying? Now, if you're somebody who's maybe a little poorer, you don't have the QR weapons, first of all, I'd say maybe go farm Cove to Roth. Second, I'd say you can just use a regular weapon, like maybe a Sophagiva weapon that's been built for ice damage, and then simply, you know, put on 2-piece Velkhana. You'll drop the Cove to Roth, but you'll pick up 2-piece Velkhana. Or if you're wanting to do like a light Bogan build, you could do a light Bogan build with Divine Blessing and 3-piece Sophagiva. Again, you would lose some of your damage output, but you would gain so much defense at the same time. So I'm bringing this to attention because I feel like so many people don't talk about this, and I'm one of the few Monster Hunter YouTubers that does talk about this. One thing you probably noticed, I didn't have Coalescence on the build. Coalescence is pretty strong for this fight if you want to bring it. You know, one of the things I'm trying to decide is what's better. Would it be better to have Agitator, or would it be better to have Blight Resist 2, Coalescence 3? So kind of like, Coalescence is expensive to build is what I'm trying to say here. Coalescence is not cheap, and it's funny because the builds are so tight that you've got a lot of different options. I can't decide how much better Coalescence is than, say, Agitator or Attack Boost 7, right? So there's different, there's a lot of different, in the end, my feeling is I'm not really pleased with Blight Resist 2 because you'll get hit by, you know, actual blights constantly, and what I find is these, not only do they overlap with each other, so you will get like 2 different blights that overlap, but they last long enough to be annoying. So right now I'm not a big fan of the Blight Resist 2 Coalescence 3 setups. I have played with them though, they're quite interesting. But right now, I find it's much cheaper to just build that 3rd level of Blight Resist, and then to build a lot of other different skills. You can just go straight for Agitator, Attack Boost, or some other form of defense, or Wide Range, which is quite useful to the team. So those are my feelings on the Coalescence skill right now. The doctor's still out on that. I'm not entirely sure what I recommend when it comes to Coalescence. It honestly did not feel that strong. Let's talk about gear for a moment. We've got the Rocksteady Mantle and the Temporal Mantle, which are still my favorite. You have to remember this one trick though. Do not grab him by the head. He will rock your body while you're wearing the Rocksteady Mantle if you grab him by the head. I've died multiple times to this. You don't want to be doing it. And you don't even need to. You don't need to soften the head. So the only reason you might be grabbing the head is if you're going to throw him into the wall with the flinch shot. And it's just all risk, isn't it? You kind of have to... It's a little bit RNG, I guess. You have to kind of rely on him not using an electrical move next before your claw comes out and smacks him in the head to turn him. Okay, so just be careful with that. Those are my favorite gears. The next tip is going to be all about the meals, and this is a big one. For the meals, Feline Moxie is really nice, but before you go for Feline Moxie, which, remember, Feline Moxie is guts, before that, you're going to check for Feline Insurance. If you can get Feline Insurance, go eat Feline Insurance for your team. You crazy? You Maddie? And then if you can't eat Feline Insurance, what you need to do is you need to check everybody to see what they've eaten. So you can do this by, you can actually see who's in your group, right? And then once you are looking at who's in your group, what you want to do is check them to see what meals they've eaten. You just click on them and scroll over through the build, and the meal will show up down here, okay? So if you see Feline Safeguard, somebody else has already eaten it. That's when you go, haha, somebody else already has Feline Safeguard, and I can't eat for Feline Insurance because it's not available to me, so now I'm going to eat Feline Moxie. That's exactly how it's supposed to go. And so if everyone's doing this, your survivability and your ability to be Alatreon goes way up. If you guys get both Insurance and Safeguard onto your group, that's 5 lives total. It's a humongous difference, and your odds of winning go dramatically up. Okay, and then if the 2 remaining people who couldn't eat feline insurance, feline safeguard have moxie, you know, it's kind of an added. If moxie actually procs for those people who ate moxie each, that's 2 additional lives. That's like, in theory, it's 7 lives, guys. It's a big deal to eat appropriately for this fight. Other than that, I just recommend going after whatever your weapon benefits from. You know, bow players benefit from like black belt and feline shot, or whatever it's called, feline sharpshooter. I don't think that people are using bombardier on the gun lances, probably because the gun lances are probably building slapstick, if I had to guess. I don't know. I haven't even looked into it yet. But yeah, you'll eat your appropriate meals as usual. You might consider going for elemental resistance. Since he deals so much elemental damage, and since he does damage for all elemental types, this will make the elemental resist meals even more beneficial than usual, because it virtually nerfs the damage from all of his moves. Do you see what I'm saying? All right, so and that's what I have to say about meals. The last tip is going to be for item loadouts. Remember, with the Alatreon, you can't capture him. You're probably not going to be putting him to sleep a bunch of times, maybe 1 time, so maybe bring like 2 Mega Barrel Bombs. You want to make sure that your loadout brings everything you need for healing yourself and then some. You want to make sure that you have honey. You want to make sure that you have regular potions so you can craft extra mega potions. You've just got to max out all of your items. Make sure you are not leaving without Dust of Life, or at least life powder and the ability to craft more of those. You can bring 1 flash pod to knock him out of the sky if you want to knock him out of the sky 1 time. It's not really that important. But you need to have an Alatreon item loadout, and between fights, you need to be refreshing that loadout, because remember, no Farcaster. No Farcaster means if you land in the fight with your items already half eaten, half gone, you're not going to refill it. Well, anyways, that's true for the special assignment. Obviously, if you do the event quest and you realize you didn't eat or you didn't grab your items, you can go fix that. But yeah, just for the special assignment, make sure you're going in there properly decked out. You see what I'm saying? All right, and other than that, I would say the buffs, dash juice, those are pretty useful too. A Stare Jerky is a must. You got to have a Stare Jerky. All right, that's going to be the item loadouts, and I think that's going to be the end of my tips list. It only stretched on for 31 minutes. If you appreciate all the hard work, don't forget to leave a like on the video. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.